I never imagined that my own sister would be the one to destroy my dreams. But greed has a way of changing people in ways no one can foresee. Let me start from the beginning. I am An Nhien, 30 years old, and I have always been the responsible one in the family. Meanwhile, my younger sister, Ngoc Trinh, 3 years my junior, spent her college years partying and constantly switching majors. My parents always made excuses for her. Trinh is just figuring things out, or she's too creative for a conventional career. Unlike her, I lived frugally, worked 2 jobs at a time to pay for my business school tuition, and never indulged in luxuries. I didn't take extravagant trips, didn't buy designer clothes, but I had one dream: owning a house of my own. Even as a child, I understood that if I didn't work hard for what I wanted, I would never have anything. Having a sister who was constantly pampered made me realize early on how unfair things could be in a family. I never asked for anything from my parents, while Trinh always had expensive gifts, the latest dresses, or luxurious vacations that I could only dream of. Our family wasn't rich, but they always prioritized her, and I had to learn to be independent. I remember the countless sleepless nights, working at a coffee shop in the morning, then rushing to a temporary accounting job in the evening. I had no time for parties like Trinh, no gatherings with friends, and no one to help me. But I never complained. I knew I was building a solid future, not chasing fleeting pleasures. At 28, after years of saving, I finally had enough money to buy a French-style colonial house in the heart of Hanoi. It wasn't big, it wasn't glamorous, but it was my dream. The house had an old-world charm, with wooden window frames faded by time and worn-out brick tiles on the patio. I loved every inch of it, the peeling paint, the cracks in the walls, the signs of time. Every weekend, I devoted my time to repairing it, learning woodworking from online videos, and slowly transforming the house into a true home. I wasn't just buying a house, I was buying a dream. Meanwhile, Trinh was living in a world of illusions. Thanks to my father's connections, she landed a job at a prestigious media company without much effort. Before long, she started dating Hong Nam, the only son of a powerful real estate tycoon. Her life changed overnight. Designer outfits, luxury cars, high-end parties. Her social media was filled with glamorous photos and flowery captions about her perfect life. She wasn't the sister I used to know anymore. Now, she only cared about appearances, status, and wealth. I never envied her. I didn't need a lavish lifestyle. But what hurt me the most was how she belittled me. Every time we met, she had something condescending to say. "You're still working part-time? Must be exhausting, huh? Your house is cute, but isn't it kind of old and run down? Don't you regret wasting your time? You could have had a much better life if you knew how to enjoy it a little." I ignored her. She would never understand the value of real hard work. Then came the day Trinh announced her engagement. It wasn't just any event. It was a grand showcase for her to flaunt her new status. The massive diamond ring on her finger sparkled under the extravagant restaurant lights. I smiled and congratulated her, but deep down I had a strange feeling as if a storm was brewing. And I was right, because the real nightmare began at what seemed like an ordinary family dinner. That night, my mother cooked all of Trin's favorite dishes, a sign that something big was coming. When we all sat down, Trinh spoke, her voice sickeningly sweet. "My dear sister, my wedding has to be perfect. Hong Nam's family has very high standards, and I found the ideal venue, Hong Jia Palace, an exclusive estate that only hosts a few weddings a year. The problem is, it's a bit expensive, around 5 billion VND, nearly 200,000 US dollars. I nearly dropped my chopsticks. 5 billion for just one day? Don't be so narrow-minded." Trinh rolled her eyes. "This is the most important event of my life, and that's why I need you to sell your house." The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. "Sell my house?" I repeated slowly, making sure I had heard correctly. "Yes." She smiled as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. That old place needs too much work anyway. And let's be honest, you live alone. If you sell it, you can rent a smaller apartment and use the money to help me have the perfect wedding. I turned to my parents, expecting them to shut down this insane request. But to my shock, my mother nodded in agreement. An Nhien, your sister has a point. You're going to get married someday anyway. What's the point of keeping that house? You're not selfish enough to deny your sister her dream wedding, are you? I couldn't believe my ears. I looked around the dinner table and realized something heartbreaking. I no longer belonged here. These were my family members, yet they felt like strangers. They didn't care about the years of hard work I put in, the dream I built from nothing. In their eyes, I was just a bank account, a means to finance Trin's grand wedding. But I was not someone they could push around. I had built my life with my own hands, and I would not let anyone take it away. And so I made a decision. If they wanted to play games, I would play. But this time, I would be the one setting the rules. The rain from last night had left the morning air cool and fresh, but inside An Nhien's heart, the storm had not passed. She sat in the grand office of Ngoc Palace, a place she had just meticulously restored, gazing out at the magnificent colonial mansion through the large window. Her eyes burned with determination. Every detail of this estate was etched into her mind, not just because of its breathtaking beauty, but because of what it represented, a battle she was destined to win. 3 months ago, after walking out of that soul-crushing family dinner, An Nhien had driven aimlessly through the city, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her entire family had agreed to force her to sell her home, the home she had sweated and bled to build, just so Trin could have a lavish wedding. Not a single person had stood up for her. Not one. Pain, anger, and betrayal churned inside her like a raging fire. But instead of breaking her, it ignited something new, a fierce determination. For the first time in her life, she stopped seeking her family's approval. If they didn't value her, then she would build her own legacy on her own terms. She thought about Ngoc Palace, the dream venue that Trin was so desperate to book. She had seen it before in architecture magazines, a stunning French colonial mansion, sitting proudly in the middle of an expansive, lush estate. It was a true jewel in the world of event venues, but recently it had been put up for sale. The previous owners, an old aristocratic family, could no longer afford its upkeep. When An Nhien heard about it, a daring idea struck her. Why not make it mine? She had the money, the business expertise, and most importantly, a reason bigger than anything else: self-respect. She immediately arranged a meeting with the owners, negotiated fiercely, and after weeks of discussion, she officially became the owner of Ngoc Palace. And now, just 3 months later, the place had been completely transformed. She had hired the best architects, the finest interior designers, carefully restoring its classic beauty while modernizing its infrastructure. Ngoc Palace was no longer just a wedding venue. It was a statement, a symbol that a woman doesn't need to be given anything. She can take it for herself. Today was the day. Ngoc Trinh was coming to tour the venue. Of course, she had no idea that the place belonged to An Nhien. Sitting in her private office, An Nhien watched the security footage as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the grand entrance. Trin stepped out, radiant and overconfident, followed by their mother and a few of her high society friends. They were all laughing, oblivious to the storm waiting inside. The grand doors swung open, and Trin and their mother were greeted by Nguyen Chi, the event manager, who was fully aware of what was about to unfold. "Welcome to Ngoc Palace," Nguyen Chi said with a polished smile. "We are honored to be considered for your wedding." Trin was immediately entranced. She glided through the lobby, running her fingers over the gold-trimmed columns, gazing in awe at the towering chandeliers. "It's exactly how I imagined," she said, her voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. "Perfect." As Nguyen Chi led the group into the grand ballroom, An Nhien made her entrance. She descended the grand staircase, her hair in an elegant updo, dressed in a white power suit that radiated authority. At first, Trinh didn't recognize her. Then, in the span of mere seconds, her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to pure horror. "Ch, welcome, Ngoc Trinh." An Nhien's voice was smooth as silk, yet razor-sharp. "Welcome to Hong Jia Palace, my venue." Silence, an unbearable, suffocating silence, filled the air. Their mother gasped, clutching their father's arm for support. Trin's friends stared in shock, whispering furiously among themselves. Trinh, on the other hand, looked like a fish out of water, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to form words but failing. "You own this place," she finally choked out. An Nhien picked up a glass of red wine, swirling it lightly. "That's right," she said with a polite but merciless smile. "I don't work here. I own it." Another moment of dead silence. Then, Trin's face turned an alarming shade of red. "That's impossible!" she shrieked, her carefully curated composure shattering. You can't do this to me. I need this place for my wedding. This is my dream venue." An Nhien set down her wine glass and folded her arms. "And I needed a supportive family. We don't always get what we want, do we?" Trinh trembled with anger. "You're doing this to punish me, aren't you?" she spat. An Nhien met her eyes calmly but unyieldingly. "No," she said. "I'm doing this to protect what's mine. If you suffer because of it, that's on you." Trin's body went rigid. Their mother stepped forward, desperate. "An Nhien, sweetheart, please be reasonable. She's your sister. Let her have the wedding here." An Nhien smiled coolly. "I'm sorry, but Hong Jia Palace has a strict policy. We don't serve clients who disrespect our staff or our owners." Then, with a controlled elegance, she reached for a folder and pulled out a stack of printed screenshots. All of Trin's vicious texts, degrading emails, and entitled demands. "These," she said, tapping the pages, "are more than enough reason to refuse your request." Trinh staggered back as if she had been physically struck. Her friends gasped. Her mother looked helpless. But An Nhien? She stood tall, unshaken, and victorious. Ngoc Trinh had never felt such humiliation in her life. She had spent her entire existence being the center of attention, always getting what she wanted without having to lift a finger. But here, in the grand ballroom of Hong Jia Palace, she was being rejected by none other than her own sister. Her mother's face paled, her eyes darting between shock and rage. She had always assumed that An Nhien would give in, that she would always be the obedient older sister, the one who sacrificed for the family. But not anymore. "An Nhien," their mother snapped, her voice sharp with desperation. "This is a family matter. You can't let personal grudges ruin your sister's wedding. Do you even understand how important this is? The Hong Nam family is influential. This wedding will open doors for all of us." An Nhien slowly set her wine glass down, then looked her mother straight in the eye. "Family," she repeated, her tone icy yet calm. "Where was that same concern for family when you and Dad tried to force me to sell my house? Where was your loyalty when you all treated me like nothing more than a checkbook?" Their mother froze, lips parting as if searching for an excuse. But An Nhien wasn't done. "And as for opening doors," she continued, glancing at Hong Nam, whose expression had darkened with disillusionment, "I think this wedding is closing more doors than it's opening." Hong Nam's parents, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped forward. "Let's go," Mrs. Hong said coldly. Ngoc Trinh whirled around in panic. "No, we already sent out the invitations. We can't change the venue last minute," she cried, grabbing onto Hong Nam's arm. But for the first time, Hong Nam didn't comfort her. Instead, he looked down at her, his disappointment evident. "You told me your sister was just some mid-level office worker," he said, his voice eerily calm. "That she wasn't ambitious, that she was insignificant." Ngoc Trinh went rigid. "You lied to me, Trinh." Hong Nam's voice dropped lower, but the weight of his words was heavy. Your sister didn't need anyone's help to build her success. Meanwhile he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You expect everyone else to carry you. Trin's eyes filled with tears, not of regret, but of fear. I just didn't want to be compared to her, she stammered. I wanted to be the one people admired, not her. Admiration isn't something you can demand, Trin, Hong Nam said firmly. It's something you earn. Silence fell over the room. Then, without another word, the Hong family turned and left. Ngoc Trinh watched them walk away, her future slipping through her fingers. Their mother staggered slightly, turning back to An Nhien one last time. An Nhien, please, just help your sister this once, she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, An Nhien felt nothing. No sadness, no resentment, just clarity. She had spent her entire life giving and giving, and they had only taken. So, this time her answer was simple. No. Her mother flinched, as if she had been struck. But An Nhien didn't wait for another plea. She turned on her heels and walked away, leaving her family to deal with the consequences of their own choices. The wedding disaster. Despite her desperate attempts to salvage the situation, Ngoc Trin's wedding fell apart. With only weeks left, she had to scramble to find another venue. The only available location was a luxury hotel ballroom, but it was far less prestigious, and because it was a last-minute booking, it cost her twice as much. Everything felt rushed, disorganized, and forced. Even on the wedding day, whispers spread among the guests, how the venue wasn't as impressive as they expected, how the original location had rejected them. Ngoc Trinh tried to fake a perfect smile, posing for social media, pretending everything was just as grand as she had envisioned. But everyone knew the truth. Her dream wedding had turned into a cautionary tale, a marriage built on cracks. But the worst consequence wasn't the wedding itself. It was Hong Nam's change in attitude. After witnessing her behavior at Hong Jia Palace, something had shifted in him. The adoring gaze he once had for her was replaced by a quiet, measured coldness. And then came the prenuptial agreement. Word quickly spread that Hong Nam's family forced Ngoc Trinh to sign a financial contract, limiting her access to his wealth. For the first time in her life, Ngoc Trinh had to live on a budget. She had to ask permission for things she had once taken for granted. And she hated it, but there was nothing she could do. Her golden ticket had come with a heavy price. While Trin's life unraveled, An Nhien's only got better. After the Hong Jia Palace incident, her venue became the most sought-after wedding location in the country. Bookings were filled 2 years in advance, and her reputation as a brilliant businesswoman soared. One day, she received an unexpected invitation. Hong Nam's younger sister was getting married and had chosen Hong Jia Palace as her venue. An Nhien smirked as she signed the contract. Life is funny, she mused. She still lived in her beloved old house, still loved every crack in the walls, every part of the home she had fought to keep. She had everything she needed, and no one could take it away from her ever again. And so, while Ngoc Trinh struggled to adjust to a world where she was no longer pampered, An Nhien continued to thrive. She expanded Hong Jia Palace's events business, scouted new properties, and enjoyed the piece of a life she had built on her own terms. Because in the end, true success isn't about taking revenge. It's about proving that you never needed them to win in the first place. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's standing firm and letting karma do the rest.